everybody. Good evening. This event is being hosted by four Steiner brothers. Rabbi Moshe Steiner and I, who direct Uptown Chabad. Rabbi Yuri and Rivki Steiner, who direct the Rohr Chabad Center at George Washington University. Wave. Does he look like Moshe? Rabbi Moshe? Rabbi Rafi and Musi Steiner of Chabad of Guelph. Rabbi Srilly and Chami of Uptown Chabad at Young and Shepherd. Welcome, Torontonians. Welcome, Griffins and Guelphites. And welcome, GW Colonials.
We hope you're all safe and healthy. Let's take this opportunity to offer a short prayer for all those people and communities that need healing in this difficult time. Particularly, the Steiners have a cousin, Yehudis Bela Bas Hendel, who is in need of a very speedy recovery. I'm going to say it in Hebrew, followed by my brother Srilly saying it in Hebrew. You're welcome to say it along together with us. Lam Natseach Mizmor LeDavid, Yancha Adonai B'Yamtzara Yisagev Choshem LeYaakov, Yishlach Ezra Mikodesh U'Metzion Yisadeka, Yizker Kol Menchaisecha Ve'lascha Yidash Nasela, Yitein Lecha Chilvavecha B'Chol Atzascha Yimalei, Niranino B'Shuasecha V'Shem Elohinu Nidgol Yimalei Adonai Kol Mishalesecha, Ata Yadati Ki Yoshi Adonai Meshicha Yaneinu Mishmei Kosher B'Kburas Yesha Yeminoi, Ele V'Recha Ve'ele V'Asusim V'Anachnu B'Shem Adonai Elohinu Nazkir, Hema Koru V'Nafalu V'Anachnu Kama V'Nesoidad, Adonai HaYoshia HaMelech Yaneinu V'Yem Karenu.
For the conductor, a song of David. May the Lord answer you on a day of distress. May the name of the God of Jacob fortify you. May he send your aim from his sanctuary, and may he support you from Zion. May he remember all your meal offerings, and may he accept your fat burnt offering forever. May he give you as your heart desires, and may he fulfill all your counsel. Let us sing praises for your salvation, and let us assemble in the name of our God. May the Lord fulfill all your requests. Now I know that the Lord saved his anointed. He answered him from his holy heavens with the mighty acts of salvation from his right hand. These trust in chariots and these in horses, but we mention the name of the Lord of our God. They kneel and fall, but we rise and gain strength. O Lord, save us. May the King answer us on the day we call.
In addition to Rabbi Chaim being a very inspiring person, before he became an inspiring person, he was my classmate in yeshiva, where we did nothing but study Torah all day and do mitzvot and other things that we won't talk about. You know those nerdy kids who, after they graduate from high school, all of a sudden become these superstars? That wasn't Rabbi Chaim. He was always the coolest cat in the room, always the loudest, always the most popular. He's texting me I should stop talking. You don't want me to tell them everything? Rabbi Chaim and I grew up as students in the Chabad yeshiva, knowing that one day we would become shluchim, messengers of the Rebbe, to somewhere. We didn't know where. Rabbi Chaim was first to go to far, far away Montana. He was the first Chabad representative to the state. And I remember going with him to the airport as we danced him away to his holy mission. In the meantime, I went to Washington. My brothers went to Toronto and Guelph. And here we are today, all gathered, but only Rabbi Chaim has this fascinating story that inspires me all the time. I share his Facebook posts all the time, and I don't share anyone's Facebook posts. So without further ado, Rabbi Chaim, please, what do you have for us tonight?
Hold on 1 second, he's muted. 1 minute, 1 minute. 1 minute, we gotta unmute you. 1 second.
You're muted.
Okay.
You're probably calling me dirty names.
One second. Hold on, wait a minute. You gotta unmute him. How do we
He has to
unmute him?
unmute himself.
Yeah?
No,
Rabbi Chaim, is this your first Zoom call?
He's
Okay.
good.
Matt, thanks for unmuting me. I don't do well with people muting me. It doesn't do well for me. I don't know. I don't normally get overwhelmed with this amount of Steiners on one call. This is tough stuff. And I have to say, from all the Zoom calls that I do, I'm looking at everyone's faces here, and it's evident that you guys all share the addictive joy and smiles of the Steiner brothers. And so at least I'm on a crowd of a bunch of fun people. So I hope you're ready to have a fun time. To be honest, I don't know why I'm here, but I have a black son, so the Steiners decided that I need to talk to you. If you want a black son, I can tell you where to get one, and you'll let me know how that goes. But I think our story, the story of both Javi and I, moving to Montana, living in Montana, adopting children, running a Chabad house in Big Sky Country, which, by the way, is just south of your beautiful border. We border with the great province of Saskatchewan, that real hotspot you Canadians give to the world, Saskatchewan. So we border with you guys. And for those of you that are in Canada, I apologize to GW, to all you Washingtonians who are suffering in your own ways. But I'd like to share with you a little bit about how I ended up in Montana, how life is in Montana, because I'm guessing that will help understand a little bit about our story. But I want to start where I'm going to end. But really to really ruin the whole title that they gave this talk, rabbi with a black son, big whoop. Meaning, once you hear everything else we do in our life as Chabad rabbis and rebbitzins, especially in a place like rural America, adopting a black kid, a white kid, a Hispanic kid, an Asian kid, it's small potatoes when you put it into the bigger picture of what we do, and really is a reflection not just of Javi and I, but what is that TV show called? This Is Us. This is Chabad. What you're about to hear is not a reflection of Chaim and Javi. Sure, it's our personal story in Montana, and it's absolutely unique, but every single Chabad couple has their own unique story. I'm not going to say that it's as exciting and fun as our story. Ours definitely takes the cake, but there's an aspect to each one of those stories that is really a gift that you have right sitting there in your community. And hopefully when the illustrious Canadian government, COVID is over in Montana. So whenever it becomes over in Canada, may God do that speedy, I don't want to get in any trouble, but I hope it's sooner than later, and you hang out with your rabbi and rebbitzin again in person and it's not on Zoom, I hope you recognize the incredible gift that you have sitting right there. It's not far away in Montana, but sitting right there in your community. So in the summer of 2004, one of the operators of Chabad headquarters in New York said to me, Chaim, where do you want to spend your summer as yeshiva students? We go all over the world to communities that don't have permanent Chabad centers, permanent representations of traditional Judaism. You want to go to Africa? You want to go to Asia? And I said, no, I want to go somewhere where there's a 7-Eleven. My point being, I wanted to stay in the United States of America. So he shows me a map, Montana, Wyoming, Idaho. You want to do those three? And I looked at the map. I'm like, I'm not sure who runs this organization here in New York called Chabad, but just driving through Montana, Wyoming, and Idaho would take me about 6 months to get, I'd probably visit 3 Jews over 6 months just with the geographical location. I said, why don't I pick one? So he says, okay, pick one. So I said, let's just do Montana. So my friend Yitzchak and Yitzchak today runs Chabad in Bend, Oregon. We rented a car in Billings, Montana, and we hit the road, going from Miles City in the east to Eureka in the northwest. And we had a great time eating tuna a whole summer. That's all we had was cans of tuna and some vegetables. And Mike and Ike's, they have that in Canada, Mike and Ike's, jelly beans and Twizzlers. And that's why this looks the way it looks. And we had a wonderful summer visiting Jews. Then the second summer came, the summer of 2005, and I went back to Montana. Then Passover came, Pesach came, and I sent matzah to every Jew I knew in Montana because it sort of became my place to hang out with the Jews of Montana. In the winter of 2005, so almost 2006, it was Hanukkah, and I wanted to do some Hanukkah parties in Montana, but all these big hotshot Chabad rabbis, including some Steiners that are on this call, I was looking for a partner to go with me to Montana for a few days to do Hanukkah parties, and everyone looked at the temperature in Montana. Everyone looked at the road conditions in Montana, and they knew what their other options were. If you can go to St. Thomas or St. Martin, why would you go to Montana during December? So nobody, I couldn't find one Chabad yeshiva student to join me. So I called my sister. My sister was then, 19, 20 years old. She had winter break. I said, Rochel, what are you doing for Hanukkah? She said, nothing. I said, good, you're coming to Montana. It was the only time in Jewish history or in Chabad history that a brother and sister, both single, spent Hanukkah together in a foreign place, lighting menorahs, making Hanukkah parties. We did 4 parties, Billings, Bozeman, Helena, and Missoula. I came back from Montana. January 1st, 2006 was the first time I met soon-to-be my wife, Chavi. On March 22nd of that year, we got married. Chavi's from San Antonio, Texas. And my father-in-law thought he was marrying his oldest daughter off to a very illustrious scholar. As Yuri mentioned, a lot of learning in yeshiva, and that continued even after my marriage. And he said, I'd like you to spend a year in Crown Heights studying in Kollel, the married people yeshiva. And I said, sure, no problem. I'll do as much learning there as I did in yeshiva. And so instead of moving to Montana immediately after our wedding, I spent the year in Crown Heights. But I didn't want to have an extra moment outside of Montana. So the morning after our first wedding anniversary, as Yuri said, he was at Newark Airport with a couple of friends. I still have the pictures from that great moment. And Chavi and I, alone with a few friends, a couple of family members, headed to Big Sky Country. And it's been an incredible journey. Montana is a very different place. It is rural America. There's about 20 million guns in Montana, and less, just about 1 million people. So do the math. It is a very different type of place than Brooklyn. But it's also an incredible place because most people are what we call in America libertarians. They live and let live. They don't care if you're white, black, Jewish, Hispanic, Muslim. It makes no difference. As long as you don't step onto their property without permission, you're okay. If you come into their property without permission, doesn't matter what you are, there's going to be an interesting barrel looking at you. And if you make the wrong move, that barrel is going to unload something interesting into your chest. And that's truly the experience. So you're going to ask me, is there anti-Semitism in Montana? Very, very little. In 13 years of living here permanently and 16 years of visiting the state, I have yet to encounter direct anti-Semitism, meaning it exists. A flyer here, a flyer there, a nudnik here, a nudnik there. They're here, but they're not here in great numbers. The average Montanan would not tolerate it. And I believe wholeheartedly that to deal with an anti-Semite, us Jews as a whole are making a big mistake. You don't deal with anti-Semites by constantly turning every ignoramus into an anti-Semite. I'm telling you from my own experience. I can't talk for the JDL and the AFL and all the wonderful Jewish organizations that deal with issues, world issues. I talk for Chaim Bruk. Chaim Bruk in Montana will tell you, if you want to deal with anti-Semites, talk to them. The average person that doesn't like Jews is simply because he never heard of us, he never met one of us, like the guy in the gas station in Helena, Montana, once told me. He was looking at me in the gas station a little funny, so instead of waiting for him to say something inappropriate, I walk up to them. That's my modus operandi. I walk up to them, I said, hey, you look a little confused. I'm Jewish. Now, when you do that to someone in their face, they become very defensive because now you just identified yourselves. Obviously, you're not really concerned. So he says, oh, Jewish. I've never met one of your kind before. So what do you think happened from there on? You think that person's going to stay an anti-Semite even if he was one? No. From now on, he'll say, I remember 10 years ago, I met a Jew in a gas station. Hell no, he was very straightforward. So you got to be upfront. You got to educate people. You can't kvetch a whole day about anti-Semites if you never engage with anyone. So what is ignoramus? Most people in Montana are very ignorant about Jews, as they are ignorant about most minorities, actually as they are ignorant about a lot of things. But not every ignorant person is an anti-Semite, and not everyone that says the wrong word about black people is a racist. They simply don't know. They've never been taught that those terms are not appropriate. So if a Jew uses the term Schwarze, is he a racist? No. Most of the time not. They simply never heard. They never knew that it was inappropriate. It's just like when most people in Montana use the term, and I'm going to say it, when they say Jew him down, they don't mean that, they don't actually associate it with Jews. It's just a term used in Montana for cheap people. So when you educate them that it's offensive because all the Jews are not cheap. They're all very giving and generous and philanthropic. You just have to demystify the myth and it's all done. You've educated them. And so when you live in a place like Montana, you have the ability not just to deal with the 4,000 or so Jews that live spread across a territory, a geographic location the size of Germany, but you have the ability to truly change minds, change hearts, get on the radio, talk to people, get into the paper, write op-eds for the local paper. It's a small paper, right? you write an op-ed for a little newspaper in Libby, Montana. It's like 500 miles away from Bozeman. And there's, 111 people that live in the whole town. But when you write an op-ed about Lag BaOmer in a paper in that little town, everyone's going to read it. So now everyone will know what the Jewish approach is to dignity and respect, like Rabbi Akiva's students. You really have the ability to change things. And it also gives you the responsibility and the responsibility to do things that many Chabad rabbis are blessed not to have to do. For example, most Chabad rabbis, my wonderful colleagues, they live in big cities, and if God forbid someone passes away, they call the Holy Society, the Holy Burial Society, the Chevra Kadisha, and they swoop in and they prepare the body for a proper Jewish burial. They do all the quote-unquote dirty work. It's not dirty work, it's holy work, but they do all the prep work, the work you have to wear aprons for and use drills for and operate. And the rabbi shows up all faputz, all beautiful for the funeral. He spent the whole morning getting himself ready to look good at the funeral. He shows up to give a eulogy. He sounds like a super duper winner. Oh, the rabbi was amazing. He was so emotional. He is such a mate, right? We all experience. Okay, that's what rabbis do. Except when you're in Montana and you're sitting in the park having lunch with your wife, and you get a call one day. You're in Montana. I was in Montana for maybe a year. I get a call from a guy named David. He says, Rabbi, Dad is very, very ill, and we want you to do the funeral. Now, I knew Dad. I knew his dad very well, but I never trained in New York to do funeral. I mean, I could speak at a funeral, but not to prepare a body with tahara, with the preparation. So I spent the next 36 hours on the phone and learning how to do tahara. And 36 hours later, I was driving at 4 a.m. to Great Falls, Montana, which is, it's up north, it borders with Alberta, actually. It's not too far from the Alberta border. And I got there at 7 a.m. I had two other local Jews join me, and we prepared Zali's body for burial. By the time the funeral came at 10 a.m., I looked like a tzklapte shine. I looked like a truck ran me over. I didn't look like I was ready to do a funeral. But the most important part of the funeral, which is making sure Zali gets a proper burial and making sure that he was prepared with all the rules and regulations of Judaism, was done. And that was an incredible moment for me to be able to know that I was part of this person heading to heaven in the most proper way. And I've done it many times since. But those are things you got to learn on the job when you're in Montana. Just like when we bring a moil in for a bris in Montana, right? Most of the Jews in Montana, many of the males, the adult males, maybe they had a bris, a circumcision, but it was done by a doctor. So you want them to do what's called a tafas dam bris, which is, I'm not going to get into the gory details, leave it to your rabbi to explain it to you, but basically you got to go to the same location at the bris and get a little blood out of it and create a situation where now it's a kosher bris. So I announce in Shul Shabbos, the moil is going to be here tomorrow morning, and if you never had a bris by a moil, this is your opportunity. And yeah, a 53-year-old man in our shul at 4 a.m. the next day was sitting with a moil. We had a becher, we had the whole dish cup with wine and a whole ceremony, even though he had a circumcision. But to be able to do that for a Jew who otherwise would never have it is an incredible experience. And it works on all fronts. So in 2011 or 12, I got a call from a woman named Ramona. She said, Rabbi, Sheldon drowned on the Boulder River. So if you know Montana, with all due respect to the Canadian rivers and lakes, the fly fishing capital of the world is in Ennis, Montana. So if any of you are fly fishermen, this is where you want to go. By the way, it's not a bad place. You can't get across the border right now, but if you ever want to escape from Canada, you can come through Alberta and we'll let you in. It's a great place to escape to. And so we have fly fishing here, and he went fly fishing. And if you know anything about fishing, he was standing in the river with the waders on, and there was some kind of miscalculation by the fly fishing guide, and he and his guide both drowned in the river. So I said to Ramon, I said, where's his body? The guy drowned. Did they find the body? He says, yeah, the body's at the coroner's in Billings, in the big city of Montana. So I said, what are they doing? She says, they want to do an autopsy. I said, autopsy for what? Everyone knows how he died. He drowned. There was no foul play. This is Montana. There's no foul play. So I said, I need the number to the coroner's office immediately. And I still, when you're a rabbi, you have to ask God that at the right moment you say the right thing, because it can go either very good, very well, or very, very bad. It's probably a good rule in general in life that you should pray to God before you open your mouth. But specifically when you're a rabbi and there's a lot on the line. So I called the coroner and she answered the phone. And I said, hi, is this coroner so-and-so? She goes, yeah. She said, yeah. I said, my name is Rabbi Chaim Bruk from Bozeman. And with the power invested in me by God Almighty, I prohibit you from touching Sheldon's body. I still don't know where those words came from. I assure you that when it was done, till today, I walk around wondering, I don't know. I really don't know where. I never used those terms before, and I don't think I've used it since. But it worked. She stuttered a little bit, and she said, Rabbi, what would you like me to do with the body? I said, I'm sending a hearse from Bozeman to pick up Sheldon's body. Just leave it. We'll deal with it from here. She never touched the body. She never did the autopsy. We got the job done. You have to be a little meshuggah to say something like that to the coroner. There's only like 3 coroners in the whole state of Montana. So it's, you don't want to have a bad reputation with them. But it worked, and Sheldon was buried according to Jewish law back in his hometown in Maryland. But we got it done. And so when a Jewish mother called me from LA and said, our son's at a therapeutic school in Helena, Montana, in the state capital, and he's turning 13, and we want to have a bar mitzvah. So I said, so let's have a bar mitzvah. So she said, but I said, invite all your family from all over the country. Just like you would invite them to LA. We'll rent a hotel, like a hotel ballroom. When I say ballroom, it's a little of an overstatement. We don't have really ballrooms, but a little conference room in a hotel in Helena. And I'll bring all the kosher food. We'll get a pair of tefillin for Michael. It was one of the most inspiring moments for me as a rabbi to stand there with this kid who's coming from a therapeutic program, dancing away with him and his father, who was struggling with MS, but dancing and celebrating this kid's bar mitzvah in Helena, Montana. Being able to bring that to a Jewish kid like that was simply a gift. And all these gifts, by the way, are gifts that the Rebbe gifted the world. In a couple of weeks from now, the world is going to be commemorating the Rebbe's yahrzeit. It's the first time in my experience since the Rebbe passed away in 1994. I've never missed being at the Rebbe's resting place on his yahrzeit. I think this is going to be the first time, sadly. I did my homework on going to New York, and it's not looking promising. Miracles could happen, but right now I'm going to vote with nature, and nature's telling me to stay away from that illustrious city. But the Rebbe dreamed, right? Only the Rebbe could have dreamed of a Jew in Montana from LA having a bar mitzvah in a hotel conference room, and that would make the Rebbe's whole day, the Rebbe's whole week, the Rebbe's whole month. That was being able to, you could provide that to a Jew like that. I've told this to many communities wherever I speak, because I think it's a fascinating thing. In the Hasidic dynasties, I think the Steiners are connected to some other Hasidic dynasties that are not Chabad, as am I. I have associations with the Ger Hasidim, the Hasidim of the town of Gur in Poland. I'm a descendant of the original Ger Rebbe. And I can't find one of the Ger Rebbes asks the $1 million question about Hanukkah. What's the question? Why is there such a big deal made about Hanukkah? We have an 8-day celebration. We eat latkes. We stuff our faces. We light menorahs. Chabad rabbi shows them in town. The first thing they do is put up a menorah. That's their hello. Why? Because the Syrian Greeks forgot one jug of oil, so you have to make a whole. So what? We all forget. You never forgot a grocery bag in your car, and you looked for 12 hours and you couldn't find it, and 2 days later you found it under your daughter's car seat. We all forget things and we can't find it. So the Greeks forgot one. You have to make a whole yom of it. The Ger Rebbe said something very powerful that I live with almost every day. And he said that the miracle wasn't that they found the oil. The miracle was that they searched for the oil. What would we do if we had a 3-year war against an enemy trying to oppress us and we kicked their butt? We won. What would we do after a 3-year war? We won. We'd pat ourselves on the back. We'd go on vacation to the Bahamas, to Bermuda. Where do you guys go? To Manitoba, some Newfoundland, some real hot spot in Canada. You'd go somewhere fun. And then, when you get around to it, you'll start searching for oil. That's not what the Jews did. That's not what the Maccabees did. They had just won the war, and they went to search for oil. The Ger Rebbe says that was the miracle of Hanukkah, that they never stopped searching. And what I tell people is that the fact that we find Jews spread across all parts of Montana. Remember, Montana, you can drive from Chicago to New York, and you could do the same thing in Montana within the state, and it's the same distance. Chicago to New York, that's how big Montana is. And we do it all the time. We travel from corner to corner of the state. And you can do that and find Jews inspired, their souls on fire. You show up at their door and they're excited to see you. They never met you before, but they're excited, they're on fire. And that's not a miracle. Because they're Jewish, of course they're excited. The miracle is that the Rebbe in New York that cared about the Jew living in Glendive, Montana, cared about the Jew living in Guelph, right? Let's face it. None of us grew up thinking that one day when we retire, we're going to move to Guelph. I don't think so, at least. no offense, but I'm pretty sure it's not a high on the bucket list, just like Billings, Montana is not high on anyone's bucket list. But Jews end up there. Jews end up there. Why they end up there? Their grandkid moved there. They found a good, whatever the reason is. And who's going to provide them Yiddishkeit? Who's going to bring them rocking Purim parties and latkes to their Hanukkah parties and challahs to their door? And now, especially with Corona, it turns out Chabad rabbis and rebbitzins are full-time catering companies. We deliver kimwa and challahs and brownies the whole day. We're showing up at people's doors. We don't want any of you to forget us. We will continue coming to your doors. So God forbid during Corona, you should never forget us. But the reality is, who's going to bring that? That's not us. With all due respect to all these wonderful rabbis and rebbitzins, with all due respect to myself, it's not us. This is what the Rebbe believed in. Because the Rebbe believed something that today is becoming more common, even in the realm of psychology, in the realm of world perspective. But the Rebbe was talking about this, and not only the Rebbe, the founders of the Chabad movement 200-300 years ago were talking about the novelty of quality over quantity, right? Unfortunately, sometimes we learn the novelty of quality over quantity in the negative, but from the positive, it's not about numbers. If I wanted numbers, if I wanted pews full with Jews, right? Yeah, 900 Jews, you give a sermon. You know what a sermon looks like in Bozeman, Montana? First of all, as the entire population is armed, including every member in my shul, you can never give a sermon more than 20 minutes, because when everyone's armed, you have to be very careful. If they get really anxious or agitated with the things you say, it could have a very different ending. That's A. B, when your whole shul population is 14, and 2 are napping, and 2 are busy, and they're running, and this one's... Could you imagine you end up giving a sermon, and you're talking to 4 people? If you don't believe with every fiber of your being that every neshama is amazing and beautiful and has a quality that's unbeatable, then you would never survive. But the Rebbe taught us that it's not about numbers. I care about numbers. First of all, there is some pluses in having smaller quantity. First of all, you get to actually know your rabbi and rebbitzin. They're never too busy for you. There's never a Chabad rabbi and rebbitzin in Montana are never too busy for you, because you're all they got. How could they be too busy for you? Second of all, when we want to do a campaign, we can do it. If I want to give something to every Jew in Montana, it's doable. And I don't have to rob 3 banks to make it happen. We wanted to get a mezuzah on every door for every Jewish home in Montana. So we're not there yet, because simply we haven't gotten to every home physically to put it up. But we put over close to 500 mezuzahs. You can do that. You raise $5,000, $10,000, which in Canadian, I think right now is like $40,000. You get that done, and you can put mezuzahs on every door. When there was a Nazi uprising, there was a few neo-Nazis, a few nudniks that made some noise in 2016 up in northwest Montana. We said we're going to do a Montana Chumash project. Actually, I think one of our big donors to that project, correct me if I'm wrong, Rafi, was in your neighborhood. A wonderful Jew who I believe passed away, Mr. White. Right, is that his name? Yeah. So Jews from all over the world donated. And a few weeks later, a Chumash arrived at every Jewish home in Montana. Right now, just this morning, we officially sent the boxes out. We're starting a campaign that every Jewish home in Montana should get the book called Positivity Bias. Because we complain all day, which is so counterintuitive. We complain about people complaining. It really doesn't help when you complain about all the people complaining, because you're doing the exact same thing, just like it doesn't help to hate the people that hate, because you're pretty much perpetuating the same problem. If you love the people you hate and you talk nicely to the people that are complaining, then you're accomplishing something. But if you complain about the complainers and hate the haters, you are part of the same problem, and I'm doing that same thing to you, what you did to them right now. But the point is, I hope you followed that. If you want me to, I could repeat it slower in a non-New York speed. I could email you that whole line. I rehearsed it for a long time in the shower, so I could send it to you. But the point is, we want to change people's perspective, because if you look at social media today, it's pretty evident that people are very angry and miserable. And some of them I can't blame. If I lived where they lived, I'd probably be miserable too. And I live in Montana, where I wake up every day and I look outside. And even on the worst days, the mountains are still fantastic. The snow-capped mountains. Yellowstone's always 80 miles away from my house. When it says in Psalms about Jerusalem, Harim Savivlo, that the city of Jerusalem is surrounded by mountains, every time I go to Jerusalem, I look for that. But in Montana, I don't have to look too far, because it's literally right there. It's surrounded by mountains. And when you see that, you don't have to be miserable. But my point is that if we want to change people's perspectives, you got to educate. It's the same philosophy that we had about the anti-Semites. And so We're getting a book now to every Jewish home in Montana called Positivity Bias. If your rabbi hasn't told you about it, I have now. And you can now go harass them to get you a copy. But the point is, you can do that in Montana, which you can't do. If the Steiners in Toronto, the double Steiners of Toronto, decided to give every Jew in Toronto Positivity Bias, they would be in debt till 2047 to get that done. But in Montana, we can do that. It'll take a couple of nice donors and, $10,000, $20,000, and every Jew would get that. But it also, being in Montana also brings a lot of fun stuff. And I'm going to give you the best example of it. In 2009, the New York Times, I don't care, I know probably half the crowd here doesn't like the New York Times, the other half does like the New York Times. The good news is if I really liked them and would read it, I would stay in New York. There's a reason I left New York and moved to Montana, so I can read the Bozeman Daily Chronicle. It's way less stressful than the New York Times. But the New York Times ran a special guest columnist named Eric Stern, wrote a story. I'll give you the background of the story, but then I want to read to you 2 quotes from the story. So we arrived to do Chabad. We came to do a menorah lighting with the governor when we arrived in Montana. At the time, the governor's name was a Democrat governor. His name was Brian Schweitzer, sweet man. We did a menorah lighting. I showed up in the Capitol, and a guy walks up to me and says, "Do you speak Hebrew?" So I said, "I do." So he said, "Well, there's a sergeant downstairs that needs to speak to someone that speaks Hebrew." Sergeant that needs to speak someone Hebrew in Montana. It just sounded weird. So I went downstairs and he says, "Listen, I know this sounds crazy, but we got a bomb sniffing dog for the Capitol, for the governor, for the Capitol in Helena. And they didn't realize when they got the dog that the dog was from Israel. So the dog was trained in Hebrew, and it ended up in Montana where a poor, nice Christian, white Caucasian Christian sergeant was Nebuch trying to teach this dog commands. And there was no one to talk to because the dog didn't understand. And even though they gave him a paper that had all the commands in Hebrew, he couldn't pronounce it. So the dog had no idea what he was talking about. For months, this poor sergeant was suffering. And now he saw a bunch of Jews showing up at the Capitol. He said, "Oh, maybe someone speaks Hebrew." So I sat there for about 10 minutes. And I said, "Shev, Amod," a few of the commands. I told him how to pronounce it in Hebrew. And that was the end of it. The whole story ended right there, except one of the Jews that worked for the governor loved the story. And a year later, so December, I think, of 2009, he wrote an article for the New York Times. And I'm now going to read to you the last 2 paragraphs in that article. It read like this. "So all is well in the Jewish community here because the Hasidic rabbi is helping the Montana cops speak Hebrew to his dog. It is good news all around. The officer keeps the Capitol safe and the Hebrew pooch is feeling more at home hearing his native tongue. But the big winner is the rabbi, a recent arrival from Brooklyn who is working hard against tough odds to bring his Lubavitch movement to Montana. He has been scouring the state for anyone who can speak Hebrew and is elated to have found a German shepherd he can talk to." That was the way the article ended. And by the way, you can Google it. The article is called, if you Google dog Hebrew Montana, it's going to come up. But the article is called "Yes, Mikey, there are rabbis in Montana." Mikey was the name of the dog. So the article was "Yes, Mikey, there are rabbis in Montana." And for 3 days, it was the most emailed article on the New York Times website, which is a little depressing because, I could have put on film with 900 Jews. The New York Times wouldn't care. I put a dog for 5 minutes of my life, and that was a very important story that lives for all eternity. Anytime anyone Googles my name, I guess it could be worse. There are people that have much harder time when you Google their name, but when you Google my name and it ends up with that, it's a very ironic thing. But take kosher, for example. Right? We got a call the first summer we moved to Bozeman. Federal Express, FedEx in Memphis, Tennessee. I see on the caller ID. USY, the United Synagogues Youth, which is the conservative movement of Judaism, had a bus of 63 staff and campers in Yellowstone National Park, and their kosher food was nowhere to be found, and FedEx was supposed to deliver it, and they lost the boxes. So FedEx is calling us to ask us if we can cater kosher food. This is at 12 o'clock in the afternoon for 6 p.m. that day to cater for 63 people. So I look at Chavi. I said, we can make a good killing here. I was so naive and I regret it every day. I told FedEx that for $1,300 we can do it. Now, if I knew what I know today, that would have been another zero. And FedEx would have done the same thing for $13,000 because they needed to get the food to that camp. The reality is at 6 p.m. FedEx showed up. They picked up, meatballs and spaghetti, whatever it was, for the whole camp. And we got a beautiful card from the conservative movement thanking us for providing the kosher food. But those are experiences that you can only get by us. I mean, I see Rabbi Yitzi Steiner on here somewhere from Minneapolis. He snuck on, and from University of Minnesota. And we get all our kosher food from a company out of Minneapolis. God bless Minneapolis. They can use all the blessings they can get. And hopefully by Tishrei time for Rosh Hashanah, the truck will be able to leave Minneapolis and come to Montana. But for the time being, up until today, we got our food from Minnesota. And so, we always wondered, what it looks like on the outside, because we get our truck, it's always Saturday night. So in the winter, it's no big deal. 6 p.m. after Shabbos, we go to the truck stop, middle of the I-90. A bunch of Jewish families meet the truck. We empty our boxes into our vans and SUVs and we go home. But in the summer, Shabbos doesn't end until 10:15. So 11 o'clock at night, you're standing in a rest area, middle of the night, bunch of random cars taking boxes off trucks. It looks very suspicious. And I knew it was a question of time before someone calls the cops, calls the FBI, that there's something going on. But lo and behold, it happened 2 years ago, Pesach, or 3 years ago, Pesach, 2 weeks before Pesach, Passover. I'm standing at the rest area. I see 2 police cars come into the rest area. One goes one way, one goes the other. And finally, my dream has been fulfilled. I knew that now, finally, I'm going to have my moment. And indeed, they came out. They're Montana cops. They don't right away pull out their guns because they know that everyone else has guns too. So they come up nicely. They say, "Sir, who's in charge here?" I said, "Right here." He says, "Can we see your driver's license?" I said, "Of course." "Officer, I bet you're wondering what we have in these boxes." He goes, "Yes, sir." "Well, what do you have?" He already realized as he started talking. I said, "Well, Passover's coming." And then I look down and I see the box right next to me. Out of all things God put there, it was a case of gefilte fish. Now, you talk to a cop in Montana about gefilte fish, that's like talking to a Sephardi Jew about gefilte fish. It's a foreign entity. You don't want to. So I say to the guy, I said, "You ever heard gefilte fish? It's a Jewish kind of fish that we eat." I started this whole spiel, and I started cutting open the box, and he stopped me and said, "Okay, we're good." I said, "Officer, this has been a wonderful experience. I just want you." And basically, a visitor that was at the rest area saw this going down and called 911. They thought they were saving the world from a big, whatever deal was going on. So those kind of things were like when El Al Airlines, imagine you're on an El Al flight. As it is, it's hard enough. Let's be honest, between us, it's not easy to be on a flight with another 350 Jews. It's a long experience to be on a plane. Every minute someone wants a minion. This one's complaining about who he's sitting next to. This one's complaining about it's a whole complaining. It's a plane of complaining, right? I try to fly Delta to Israel to stay away from that. It hasn't worked. Last time I was on a Delta flight, they showed up with a minion. I'm like, I try to escape you people. But the bottom line is an El Al flight going from Tel Aviv to Los Angeles. It's like a 15 and a half, 16-hour flight. After 14 and a half or 15 hours of flying, they had an engine light go up as they were crossing over Canada from the corner of Saskatchewan into Montana. A light went on and the Israeli pilots refused to fly. They're going to land the plane in the closest airport that can handle a 747, which was Billings Airport in Montana. And so they land the plane. I was flying that day, so I was heading to D.C. I actually stayed with Rabbi Yudi that night. For the next 2 nights, I was in D.C. with the Steiners in D.C., and I land in Minneapolis, and my phone is blown up with voicemails. So finally, the guy gets a hold of me. It's the rabbi of El Al. And he starts screaming at me in Hebrew, which is natural. He starts screaming at me in Hebrew that I need to provide food. There's 300 people in Billings. I'm like, "Sir, I don't know who you're talking. I don't know who you think you're talking to. But I'm not a caterer. B, I don't live in Billings. And C, I'm in Minneapolis. My wife's home, 3 kids under the age of like 4. So stay calm, talk a little slower, and let's see what we can do together as a team here." And I was talking to him in Hebrew, so he slowed down and he told me what's going on. He says, "Chayavim, ochel." I said, "Why? These guys ate 9 times since they left Israel. What's the emergency for food? Listen, I'm happy to provide it, but let's not turn it into an emergency. It's not like they've been fasting for Yom Kippur, and now you need to break the fast." So he said, no, because we don't know how long they're going to be stuck. So I called Chavi. He said, "Chavi, I don't know how to say this, but I'm on the way to D.C. There's a plane of 316 Israelis in Billings. Now, the Billings airport is the size of most of your living rooms. And so they had to stick 316 Israelis with 1 bathroom in the Billings airport, waiting for a replacement El Al plane, which only came 12 hours later." So Chavi says, "What's the question? I'll load up the car with the kids and we'll go." 8 o'clock Sunday morning. So the night before, we got our order from Minnesota. So she loaded up rugelach and cold cuts. She stopped at Walmart and got some Bas Yisrael bagels. And She loaded up a handful of food and showed up. She walked in through security into the room of the Israelis. They welcomed her like Queen Esther showed up. They literally, like the heroine of Judaism was there. And I don't really think it was about the food. I think they were blown away that Chabad was there. And it did an incredible thing because Jews from around the world that had relatives on the plane or they themselves were on the plane were making donations. It was a great thing for Chabad Montana financially. I got to tell you, they should do it more often. If you ever have to have an emergency landing, I really would appreciate it in Montana because Jews really like when we show up. And it was a great day for business at Chabad of Montana. But it was also a reminder of how we are this incredibly tight-knit Jewish family. And it's something that no matter what anyone tells me, you will not find that kind of love anywhere else. So for all our issues that we have, Jews with infighting and, all the issues we make and the divisions, at the end of the day, we are an incredible people. And the Rebbe really raised a generation of soldiers, a generation of young couples who are ready to go out there because they see the world the way the Rebbe did, right? Which other crazy couple? I mean, and for this, I'm going to take a little bit of credit if you wish. We moved to Montana. There's no mikveh in Montana. So let me tell you something about mikveh. Jewish couples use a mikveh every month. The woman uses a mikveh. Now, many couples move out to remote areas where there's no mikveh, but there's a caveat because if the woman is pregnant or she's nursing, they don't need to use the mikveh every month. So yeah, you move out, you have a baby every 9 months, every 11 months, so the mikveh comes about once a year. But when you move out and you don't have any biological children and you're not pregnant, you need to use the mikveh every month. You can't use the rivers in Montana because similar to the rivers in Canada, they're frozen, and even the 3 months a year when they're not frozen, they're freezing because it's melted snow. So we drive to Salt Lake City, Utah, which is 7 hours south of us every month, 14 hours round trip to use the mikveh. And so only the Rebbe could invent a group of people that are crazy enough to have some level of psychosis to move to a place knowing that you're going to get involved in that. You're going to have to do that. Which, by the way, I have to tell you, if you ever need it was the best fundraising experience I ever had. There's one way to get an Orthodox Jew that knows what a mikveh is to write out a check. Tell them you're driving 14 hours round trip for a mikveh. The people didn't know how to sign the checks quick enough. We built a $250,000 mikveh in Montana within 2 years of moving here. It's a beautiful state-of-the-art mikveh, gorgeous. Every Chabad rabbi that comes says, how do you do it so quickly? Drive to Utah. We tell the rabbi you have to go to mikveh once a year. We're like, okay, go once a year, have a safe trip. When you tell them you're driving every month, it's a whole different experience. And our mikveh is used because we do host a lot of tourists, people that visit Yellowstone National Park, Glacier National Park, the Beartooth Highway, Big Sky Skiing Resort. It's a happening place, believe it or not. I know they advertise us as being remote, but the bottom line is we have a lot of visitors here. And one of the most beautiful things that happens on a Shabbos in Bozeman, unfortunately, this year because of COVID, it'll be the first summer it won't happen, but we'll be back next year with a vengeance. But every summer, every Shabbos, we have about 25 to 30 Orthodox Jews that come from Muncie, from 5 towns, New York, from Israel, from all over the world that spend Shabbos near our Chabad house because they're going to Yellowstone and they interact with our local, mostly secular Jewish community. It's the most beautiful interaction. I love it. It's the Shabbos in the summer is incredible. They spend hours together getting to know each other and their families. And by Sunday, they're going on hikes together. These people that never knew each other before. And they're really getting to realize that, yes, you're not as crazy as I think, even though your payas are a little longer than is to my personal liking, and you're not as crazy progressive, even though you do have ideas that are a little out of whack, but you're a pretty normal person. They get to know each other on a personal level, and it changes their perspective forever about how they would ever talk about the other group. And what could be better for the Jewish people than creating that kind of camaraderie and unity that our people really, really deserve. And so I want to bring this full circle, if I may. I asked the question in the beginning, and at least they advertised it as the rabbi with the black sun. I'm not sure if that meant to be like a black sheep. I'm not sure what they meant with that. I'll leave it up to you guys discussing it with your Steiners. All 17 of them that are on here, and their fathers are psychologists. So if you have any issues, you can go straight to the source. But the reality is, by the way, be careful with rabbis that have fathers that are in psychology. They know way too much. They assess us way too much. I mean, I would be very uncomfortable. But just saying, the reality is that a rabbi with a black son, he happens to also have 4 daughters, and all 5 of those children are adopted. The story of our infertility journey and our adoption journey is way beyond the scope of this short little hangout we're having. I recommend all of these Steiners that if they ever want to have a proper presentation and understand what this journey was like for the communities, and I mean this seriously for a moment, that they'll be smart enough to hire my wife, Chavi, who travels around and does give a presentation just on our family dynamic, because it is a very complex dynamic. And she does an incredible job of sharing that story, which is interwoven with trust in God and faith in God and ups and downs and moments with God. It's a fascinating story. But the reality is that we do have 5 children that each come with different DNA, different genetics, different backgrounds. We don't hide the story. It's not a secret to any of them that they're adopted. It's not a secret to any of them whether they were born Jewish or they converted to Judaism. It's not a secret to any of them that they're white or black. Believe it or not, they can detect it on their own. None of it's a secret. We don't hide it from them. We tell it to them from the day that they could understand. And is it novel? Sure, in the sense that there aren't many black Chassidim. Actually, many could take the credit. He's the only black Chassid in the whole Montana. Right? I mean, and he goes to a local public school, and so he stands out. You know, yarmulke, tzitzis, dreadlocks, he got it all. It's a win-win. He's a great basketball player, great football player, great swimmer. He's got all the genetics that he needs to be on all super sides of everything. But is it novel? Let me ask you. People that open their homes to every random Jew that shows up in town, which is every Chabad rabbi. That's not us, that's all of us. And spend hours counseling and loving and visiting hospitals and nursing homes and dealing with the ups and downs of so many people's lives, because the Rebbe ingrained in us love for humanity, unconditional love, non-judgmentalism for humanity, and treating every human being with dignity. Does black really matter? Does it matter the color of the skin, or is it part of the same program? So yes, it was a unique circumstance that landed in our lap. No one's denying that. And we could have easily said no, because we think about the bigger picture, and that could be complicated. No one's denying that it could be complex for an Orthodox Jewish kid growing up as a black child and balancing those 2 parts of their experience. But from a perspective of love, from a perspective of what we do and who we are, you know the CEOs that are very good to their employees, and you find out later in the tabloids that they're miserable parents, right? Each of us is capable in the public domain to show that we're the biggest lovers of Israel. But if we can't translate that into our own homes, what does that say about us? So I'm not saying every Chabad rabbi should adopt children. Not everyone has the same journey and the same mission in this world. But the idea that it should be foreign, there's a Chabad rabbi in Argentina who doesn't get any credit because he's not looking for anything, and his kids weren't black, so no one made a big deal about it, who adopted 3 or 4 local Jewish kids in Cordoba, Argentina, who needed a home. He didn't think twice. The parents were in a bad situation. I don't remember all the details. They ended up living in his home. I don't remember if it was permanent or for a couple of years. He didn't think twice. And so that is really my message. If we truly believe in the 3 principled foundations that the Baal Shem Tov, the founder of the Hasidic movement, brought, what did the Baal Shem Tov teach? And I'm going to wrap it up with that, and then I'll take your questions. The Baal Shem Tov came in an era in the late 1600s, early 1700s, when the Jewish people had experienced between 100 and 300,000 deaths by the Greek Orthodox Cossack named Bogdan Chmielnicki Yimach Shemoy. And after that, the terrible demoralization of Judaism, which took place with Shabtai Tzvi, the false Messiah. Between those 2 events, the Jewish people were in the state of hopelessness and despair. Along comes the Baal Shem Tov and says, we're going to change that with 3 principled ideas. How you treat human beings. There's no such thing as an upper class, a lower class, a middle class. We are all equal. We are all beautiful members of the tribe of Israel. So Avat Yisrael, the love of each individual. He reminded the world that there's Hashgacha Pratis, not just generally, but every facet of creation, every blade of grass, every moment in our life is guided by divine providence. And that we need to live our lives, not just when we're serving God with a mitzvah and studying Torah, but every moment of our life needs to be infused with simcha, with joy. And so if you take those 3 principles, love, human dignity, divine providence, and living with joy, you don't succumb to infertility, because that would be depressing, not joy. You recognize that if a child lands in your lap at your front door, it's divine providence. And if you have the focus of love, of loving your neighbor, loving every human being with non-judgmentalism, it's a recipe for the same thing time and time again. And so with that, I will wish all you Canadians, Washingtonians, Guelphians, I can't keep track of, I don't know what you call you, Guelphians or Guelphiites or whatever it's called, Guelphantonians, but all of you Steiner recipients, all the Montana love that I can offer. If you're ever interested, and this is a sincere offer, if you're ever interested in getting away from whichever big city you live in, and no matter what city you're in, it's big compared to Bozeman, you can come out and hang with us for a Shabbos in Montana. And now that I'm done, I will pass on the mic to whoever runs this program, whichever one. And I'm happy to take any questions, whoever's going to moderate that. Thanks for having me, people.
Thank you, Rabbi Chaim. A round of applause. I've been inundated with messages that you are a riot, that you are hilarious.
Don't use the word riot. This time of the world, we don't use the term riot flippantly.
Like I said, you're a riot. Anyway, so everyone is convinced and ready to move to Montana. You may be inundated with more visitors there. Before we have questions and answers, and I do encourage everyone to send it in your chat, and it comes to me. I'll see it. At the bottom of your screen, there's a chat box. If you type a message, it'll go just to me. I will see it and pass it on to Rabbi Chaim. But before questions, I'm going to do a little bit of an interview, because even though you're a classmate of mine and you've been entertaining my friends and my brother's friends for the last 45 minutes, there is a particular matter of interest that I've discussed with you before personally, and I think is on everyone's mind. And I've never, in the 35 years or something like that, anyway, 30 years I've known you, I've never seen you to be shy.
It's not one of my
but
illnesses.
we are all very curious. Sorry?
Not one of my diseases. I have other illnesses, but not shyness.
We are all very curious about the experience of adopting children, especially a black son, because we've never done it before. So I hope you can understand our curiosity, and it's not anything other than we want to learn from your experience. Can you elaborate on that?
First of all, I want you to know, Yuri, that your wife texted me before that she's looking to adopt a child. So you're going to have an interesting conversation when this is over. Adoption
What's
is like
the experience
saying,
like? How is it like to raise a son?
It's incredible. There's nothing like it in the world. So there's nothing like it in the world for people that have done it. It's like childbirth. I don't know what it's like to have a biological child. So if I sat down and said, hey, Rabbi Yuri, tell me what it's like to be a biological father. Where do you want to start? I mean, that's a very complicated thing. You have to be careful where you want to start in that conversation of how a child comes to the world and how it ends up, childbirth and child pains and labor and circumcision. It's a process. And adoption is a process too. The moment you adopt a baby, it's your child. Does that mean that you take away part of their experience? Of course not, because you don't want to hide their experience from them. It's who they are. So you don't hide from them. If they grow up and they want to meet their biological parents, assuming you can get a hold of them, you don't take that away from them. It's part of who they are. And it's the hardest thing of being a adoptive parent, is to know that there's another whole story to your kid's life that you're not part of. But is that a reason to withhold from giving kids all the love in the world? I would say that the love for an adopted child is maybe even more specifically because of that perspective. It really needs to be unconditional, because sometimes there are going to be moments where it's going to come back and you're not going to be happy with the trajectory of where they choose to go. And I haven't been there yet, but there's been enough ups and downs to know that that's coming. That doesn't mean it's, in parenting in general, let me just give some parenting advice just for free, because you have me on here and you might as well you could cancel your next parenting Zoom. I'll do it now. Parenting is not about the parents. So parents that parent because they would like their kids to turn out a certain way, good luck. It's about you, not about them. Like, we don't even tell our children here in Bozeman, our family, we don't say words like, I'm proud of you. When you tell a kid, I'm proud of you, that's about you, not about them. When you tell a kid, I hope you're proud of yourself, that's about them. So if you have that kind of selfless perspective for parenting in general, biological or adoptive, then it's a lot easier to deal with those moments of sorrow and grief that we have to recognize for what they are when there are moments that don't go exactly as you plan. But it's an experience that is unbeatable. And I tell parents, when we get a lot of calls from primarily Orthodox Jewish couples looking to adopt or looking in, checking out adoption, I tell them, listen, if you're looking for an easy life, adoption's not the way to go. If you're looking for a rewarding life, and if you're looking for an experience that's unbeatable, there's nothing like it in the world. I hope that answered your question. If it didn't, I doubt if you ask it again, it's going to get any more detail.
That's the Chaim I always knew. Someone asked the question here, if you discuss what's going on in the world today with your family, particularly with many.
Very much so, of course. They see me reading the paper in the morning. They see me skimming through my social media, and they see images of what's going on. And so it's definitely been a discussion with all our children, including many. We spoke specifically about George Floyd and how something like that can come to be, where someone has enough hatred in their heart, or enough, even if it's not hatred, enough ego and arrogance to not stop when you see things are going that bad. And how we've come to, as a society, to a place where that's even possible, right? We as Jews don't know how that's possible because we don't do that. We're different. But in the greater world, that's possible. And we have that discussion, and we talk about law enforcement in general, how for the most part they are incredible people. But at the same time, there's always going to be people that have a different perspective that's unhealthy, that's unsustainable, and that the world doesn't appreciate, like racism. And racism is real. Not in our family, we recognize that it's real, not as a foreign, we talk about Martin Luther King and Rosa Parks as a very real thing in our life. I jokingly tell Chavi when we're on a flight together and then he's misbehaving, which he does very often, I said, don't say it's your kid. The flight attendants are going to be looking for the parents. It'll take at least a half an hour until they figure out that he's ours. Because on the plane, he's wearing a baseball cap. So enjoy the half an hour break. And eventually they'll say, oh, yeah, I'm so sorry. I didn't realize. You got to, it's like what we do with our Shoshana, who's, we adopted when she was 12 and she's, now she's almost 16. So people are sitting at our Shabbos table, tourists from, Borough Park or Flatbush. And they get a little weirded out because they see a 15-year-old girl. And I mentioned that, we're married 14 years and that doesn't make sense. So I say, it happens. I give them that look like, and then after 3 minutes, they say, oh, I'm just joking. Our kids are adopted. And they go, oh, you could see they're feeling like about to have a heart attack. What kind of Chabad rabbi has a 15-year-old kid when they're married 14 years? But you got to be able to enjoy the moments. I think in general, it's a general rule that if I ever stop enjoying being a rabbi, Montana or otherwise, pack my bags and leave. Give it over to someone else. You got to love what you do. You got to have fun. The minute you lose your sense of humor in this thing, you're toast, and so is your community. Who wants a miserable rabbi? You want a miserable rabbi? I don't want a miserable. My rabbi is very entertaining. I call in the most depressing days of my life, I call my rabbi, and after 15 minutes on FaceTime, I'm a different camper. And so I think that's what people want. That's what we want from ourselves. And if we can't be that, don't be in the role of leadership to inspire people. Because if you ain't inspired, you ain't gonna inspire anyone else. Just saying. Okay, we have a bunch of questions here. Anyone else want to chime in, they can do that. It is very clear, I'm paraphrasing this person's question. It is very clear that you have a lot of fun and you are full of energy. At the end of the day, though, you live in a place that doesn't have a large Jewish community. Raising 5 children, what is that like? What are the challenges that come along with trying to teach them Judaism without having anything but you and your wife to do it? First of all, I don't believe it's just me and my wife. I do believe in the words of a very illustrious person who came generations before me that it takes a village. And every single time an Orthodox Jew walks through our doors, and every time a local Jew walks through our doors and teaches our kids anything about life. Today, a woman in the community took 2 of our kids on a pack run. You know what that is? That's where you take a dog and a whole group walk. They went to hang out with the dogs and they learned a lot from the dogs. You learn from everything along the way. So I don't think it's just me and my wife, but my kids do go to public school. So in addition to their local Jewish education, which they get in various ways, private tutors online, the Chabad online school, they do go to local schools. And I'm not recommending that that's the way to do things, but our family, for what we needed, that was the right thing to do. And our mentors and our rabbis told us that that's what we should do. And that's been an incredible part of their experience. Part of their Yiddishkeit, their Judaism flourishes when they're in a room, in a classroom, in a school where, 95, 97% of the kids aren't Jewish, and the 3% that are not really involved in Yiddishkeit, and they get to bring their friends occasionally to a Hanukkah party, to a Purim party. They feel like they won the lottery. They get to teach their classes about Yiddishkeit. Then they walk around. Manny walks around with his yarmulke and tzitzis. When Manny had his upshurnish, when he was 3 years old, he had his first haircut. Now, till 3, he had these beautiful dreadlocks, and I mean that seriously. They were beautiful. So much so, it was the only time in Chabad history that that community members had an opposition to a child's upshurnish. Most times, people in the community couldn't care less if you give your kid a haircut. There was a whole movement of people in shul that said, Rabbi, you really can't get rid of the dreads. I mean, they're really, And I said, Bubby, you can make your opposition from today to tomorrow. He's having an upshernish. And on Lag BaOmer that year, we had 180 people at his upshernish because most of them just wanted to see how those dreads get cut off. And 80 of those 180 were Gentiles from the community, friends that we have. We're friends with many non-Jews in the community that came. They wanted to see an upshernish. We meet them in the streets. They say, Manny, we remember your haircut. They remember that moment. So our interaction with the local community is part and parcel of what we do. And our role in Montana is not just to the Jewish community, and our kids see that. Our kids are busy forcing me to give money and danishes and coffees to the homeless people all over town. We do a lot of that, and obviously they're not, for the most part, they're not Jewish. So we try to train our kids from home. And to paraphrase my Bubby, who was one of Crown Heights' esteemed matrons, not that kind of matron, just a nice matron, she said, education comes from the home. You can have the nicest yeshiva, nicest school. And it's true. We want our kids to be in Jewish day schools and yeshivas. But guess what? Education comes from home. And if my Bubby couldn't prove it in her day, COVID has proven it. We didn't have our schools. I know they gave you Zoom classes, but let's face it, all of us was just miserable about that. And the real education came from the Shabbos tables and the bedtime stories and the morning. That's where it comes from. And if you give that with heart and soul and make sure they can read Hebrew along the way, they'll be okay.
It's just a weird question.
A weird question, someone just said. So whoever's mic is on, it should be turned off.
That was me.
Okay.
I have so many. There's a lot of channels with a lot of different questions. I need to sift through them. Somebody wanted to know how old your children were when you adopted them.
Good question. So 4 of our 5 children, so Chaya, Zizi, Meni, and Chanalea were all adopted pretty much at birth. So Chaya, our first, was 2 months old. She was born in Russia and ended up in the United States. So we adopted her when she was 5.5, 6 pounds. She was born in preemie. And 2 months old, she was at birth. Many was at birth, hospital at birth. Chanalea was at birth in the hospital. And Shoshana, our oldest, but not first, was adopted. She was 12 years old. Now, 60, that was 4 years ago.
How does it work adopting a non-Jewish child and converting them?
I'm not a authority on conversion, but I'll just give you the basics, and that is, if a child that isn't Jewish is being adopted by a traditional Jewish couple that's going to raise that kid with in a Orthodox Jewish home, then it's really not a big deal, because the Bezdin, the Jewish court, the local rabbinic tribunal, whether it's in Montreal, Toronto, DC, the big cities have them. A Bezdin will convert the child at about 6 months old. It's called Al-Das Bezdin. They are taking responsibility that this child is going to be raised in a proper Jewish home. And when the child turns bar or bat mitzvah, when they're 12 or 13, you basically need to confirm with the child that they love being Jewish and they love celebrating their bar or bat mitzvah, and that they, recognize that this is something they want to be. And when they affirm that, that's their affirmation into the Jewish faith. So it really depends on the parents, not on the kid. The kid converting is not the issue. Whether the parents are ready to convert, and I mean transform their life into an observant life, that's the real question.
Are you an opinionated person?
Me? No, not at all. I'm on the shy side. Generally, I don't have much opinions about anything.
Great. So that was a segue to the next question. Someone wrote me a 3 or 4 paragraph essay here for you to address. I'm not going to read the whole essay, but I think the gist of the question was, and I think it's true, so I'm going to force you to answer this question.
Not going to force me to do anything.
Do you have, where's my gun? Do you have what is your clearly unique attitude and opinion on race relations in the United States of America and Canada? But Canada has no problems.
Yeah, they don't have no problems like Russia. There's not many blacks, and so they don't have problems. Of course, in Newfoundland, there's no problems with the race. Just like in Montana, there's very few problems with the race. But I'm not an expert on race. I really don't know. The answer to the question is, I recognize that there's an issue. I know that there's an issue. Not because I have a black kid, because I grew up in Brooklyn, and so I know that there's issues. I think a lot of the issues are overstated, and some of the issues are understated. There's issues that need to be dealt with that no one's dealing with. Issues that people are dealing with that really are not a big deal. And so I don't know that we have a solution. I think that there are people that live off the business. It's a very successful business. So there's Al Sharp of the world or others that really make a living off this stuff, and it's hard to tell someone to stop there. So I don't know. I think the end game will be Mashiach. He has a blog. Her blog is called the clearsmud.blog. It's an incredible blog. She writes from the heart. It's really a reflection of her life. It's clear as mud. And we talk about how there's no right or wrong here. Meaning the right or wrong and how George Floyd and others were treated. But the whole race relation issue, I think it starts from each of us in our own home. How do we train ourselves? How do we talk about Black people? When you see a Black person, do you embrace them or do you sort of keep distance because it's not a cup of tea? I was on a flight to Florida just before COVID, went back to the road, on a flight to Florida, and then he was sitting in the middle seat. Right next to him was a Black dude, and then he automatically was connected to them, so he started a conversation with the guy. I was raised by a Jewish father, so he's a little Yiddish, a little Hebrew, a little this, a little that, but where are we in the picture? Let's, do you hear me?
I think your internet is a little choppy.
No, my internet's not.
Now you're actually good.
Okay, because it gave me some warning here. Maybe it's a sign from heaven. I gotta shut up. But
We can hear you very well right now.
Can or can?
Can. Unmute yourself. You just muted yourself, but your internet is good now.
Okay, testing, 1, 2, 3, testing.
You're good.
I think all of us are busy. We think we have to post on Facebook an opinion about everything. You don't. I'm a father of a Black kid, and I didn't post anything because I simply don't know how to write nuance. My feelings in a nuanced way better at that. I'm a little too blunt, and so it could come across the wrong way. Why do we all have to have an opinion? How about our opinion in your own group? Many Black people that are not working for you. Call us to say. So I'm really.
And then we're gonna have to change the topic because
no. You asked the question.
No, because we can't hear you. I can't hear you.
My internet hasn't changed.
Talk about Mashiach. See if the internet is good.
I'm gonna hold on. I don't think it's me, but 1 second.
It is. I've been getting multiple opinions. You can't argue with the public, Chaim. As much as I respect you.
Still?
Whenever you're not talking about race relations, we're good. The minute you start talking about it.
So right now you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, I haven't changed anything. I haven't budged, and my internet's still working, and we recently got 4G in Montana. Okay, we good?
I think so. Let me read you someone's question, and assuming everything goes well, you can try to get back to that point. Sometimes when people are members of more than one group, they are accused of dual loyalties. Unfortunately, Jews in the diaspora have been accused of this on many occasions. How might you approach this problem if it arises with many?
I have no idea. I mean, you asked me.
Next question.
He's 7 years old. Move on.
Has anything like that ever come up? Has anyone ever said something about being Black? Has he mentioned about himself being Black?
All the time. He asks questions about his color, skin color all the time. He talks about it all the time. He mentions things that he hears about race all the time. He once told me that by showing him some pictures, Colin Powell and Barack Obama aren't Black, and that Oprah and Kanye Rice are. I can't explain it. He asked me one day at dinner a couple months ago. There's still people that don't like Black people. I mean, this is a real thing for him. Am I back up again? I'm gonna try to move to a different room and see if that helps.
Thank you for your efforts here.
I have no idea, but I'm gonna try. I'm gonna move elsewhere and see if that helps the situation. Any better? I don't know. You hear me?
Yeah, you want to practice your Shabbat sermon?
No, I do not. But do you hear me?
Yes, we do. We hear you.
First time this ever happened. It must be the Steiner issue.
Always been a problem for us. Okay, people write me very, very long questions. I need to like decipher them. Anybody have a short question? 1 second. Someone saying, is that a picture of your wife and children behind you? Are you the only, there they are.
That's only 3 of us at the time.
You look like a nice family.
Yeah, so they say.
Okay, so Rabbi Chaim, nothing to do with the fact that you have a black kid. You're an opinionated man, and someone has been asking me this question 3 times already, so please address it. It's the question here is something about the person is frustrated that too many times the Jewish people have been attacked, and people are silent about that. And then when something else happens in a different community, the world wants to know why there isn't enough of an uproar for them. So I guess the question has to do with, what's your take? Should we be, is voicing protest a helpful thing? Should we be silent? Both sides, both, whether it's against the Jews or against other minorities.
I don't know that I'm the guy for this.
You don't like being an authority. Okay, so I'm gonna open up the line for 1 or 2 people who want to. Instead of asking me to ask the question, let me see if others want to make the point.
I don't hear you.
Oh, I'm silent now.
You're good.
Can you hear me right now?
Yes, we can hear you.
Maybe he can hear me. Rabbi Chaim, I'm gonna give you an easy question and then open up the floor for 1 or 2 people to ask their questions directly.
I no problem. I just want to tell you that just because you have a black kid doesn't make you an expert on race relations. It's so much more complex. I mean, I love you guys that are asking the questions. I know you mean well and you want to get answers. The only answer I can tell you is that it starts from you and your family. It starts from you and your friends. Ask yourself, what are your biases? Ask yourself how many times you've judged people without knowing what they're going through, right? Without asking yourself, what don't I know about them before I judge them? Ask yourself how many times you held onto your wallet when you saw someone of a different color because you thought they might take your wallet. And then you'll realize the issue is not universal. The issue starts from within ourselves. Did you hear me just now?
Yes, we did, loud and clear. A quick question. Are the other children of other nationalities? Are they white Americans, or are they of other interesting nationalities?
Well, when you see them, they all look white Caucasian. Each one has their own nationality. One of them has Siberian descent, if you really want to know, from Siberia. One of them has Moscow descent. But yes, for practical purposes, they all look white Caucasian.
Okay, Rabbi, can I do this? Rabbi Moshe, do you know how to allow people to unmute themselves? If someone wants to, now everyone's unmuted. But maybe mute everyone, and then if someone wants to unmute themselves and ask a question, please go ahead. Now we're all muted. I know 1 or 2 people asked me if they can ask their question themselves. Unmute yourself and go for it.
Yeah, no, Rabbi Steiner, Rabbi Udi Steiner. I wanted to spare you from.
I was trying, Josh. Josh is a dear friend, but I didn't do you justice. Go for it, brother.
So I will give some context to this question before diving directly into it, which is my father, who was a rabbi as well, was the attaché to Martin Luther King to the Jewish people during the Civil Rights Movement. And one of the things that I commend about your experience, yes, you don't have to be an expert on race relations, but you grow a great deal of sensitivity in your relationship with your son to the fact that he does have a different experience. And I think one of the things we could all do, to your point, is be sensitive to different experiences people come from and the biases that that we have grown up with, and to obviously reach out across the aisle to be a great citizen, a great neighbor, and so on and so forth. My question comes from a bit more of a political bend to it, which is the protests that are being organized are by organized bodies representing a population, in that the Black Lives Matter movement has its leaders, and it's called all of us to back that there is an institutional victimization of Black people, particularly in light of what happened in Minnesota. The complexity of that is the Black Lives Movement did not stand up for the Jews when we were getting, when Jews in Muncie were being murdered, and likewise when bullying and anti-Semitism occurred in Brooklyn, and so on and so forth. And this really calls, one, your experience in being sensitive to the experience of others, but also your rabbinical wisdom. What should we do as people to back a people that deserve our backing, but a movement that abandoned us in our time of need?
So I think that's an incredible question with actually a fairly straightforward answer, and that's also part of my experience, both as a rabbi and a father of my family, and that is, you can stand up for a people without being associated with the movement. I don't need the ADL to help me fight anti-Semitism. I do it in Montana every day without some nudnik on Twitter. I write letters to the editor. I write op-eds in the paper. I call out politicians. I know their cell phone numbers. I do what I need to do on a local level as the rabbi here in Montana without anyone's help from the outside. On the contrary, I think when the outside comes into a place like Montana, it does more harm than good. If you're asking me, is it going to help the Black people, the Blacks that live in Montana, is the movement that's going on around the country going to help them or make it worse for them in Montana? I don't know the answer right now, because it could very well make it worse. Like you said, some of the leaders of these movements are so hypocritical, and they were not there for the Jews. And not only they're not there for the Jews, they're not even there for the Blacks when the Black situation doesn't fit their agenda. And so I feel like I can stand up for the Black community as a leader, again, by writing letters, by writing to the paper, by calling out politicians, by explaining, like Javi did in her blog, that this is not politics for us. This is just the horrific perspective, the horrific experience that other people experience. And we can't in any way try to understand it, because even as a Chabad rabbi who does wear a yarmulke and tzitzis, when I get pulled over by a cop, I don't shake in my boots. I don't. What are they going to do? Give me a ticket and 2 points on my license? I'll tell them a rabbi joke and I'll move on, and I'll be just fine. So the reality is, for a Jew in America, I'm not talking about in other countries, because every country is different. In the United States of America, or perhaps North America, Canada included, it is a very different experience for the Jew. And the fact that Black Lives Matter is not only didn't stand up for the Jewish community, but has a lot of issues as it relates to Israel, which is very problematic to me. And some of its leaders have been unabashedly anti-Israel. I don't need Black Lives Matter to stand for Black lives, for Hispanic lives, for Asian lives, for all lives.
All lives matter.
Not just as a slogan, because I'm not sure I'm into the slogans altogether. But we teach the world dignity. And you do that by standing up and saying, like I wrote in my weekly email, I wrote, George Floyd and Mike Doran, I think was the name of the police officer in St. Louis, the Black officer that was murdered during the riots. The fact that either of those people are in heaven today is because there's too much hatred in our world. And if we can stand up to hatred, I don't care what kind of hatred, I don't care if it fits our agenda. And by the way, I want to tell you something, Josh, I don't even care if they were hypocritical when it comes to the Jewish community. Just because they didn't stand up for the Jews, and by the way, most of the time the Black community does not stand up for anti-Semitism. In many cases, especially in Brooklyn, the anti-Semitism was coming from the Black community. It doesn't mean that we don't need to do the right thing and stand up for them when they're experiencing what their experience is, because how do we know if the fact that they even stood up against the Jews was because of their experience? So we just have to do what's right, even when politically it's not what's going to necessarily pay off. We're not a movement. We're a people with a soul. And if you have a soul, you do what's right, even if it doesn't fit your political agenda. And for that, I'll say l'chaim.
L'chaim.
Beautiful. Thank you, Josh, for doing a much better job at it than I.
Way better than you.
We
No
have
way.
to wrap up soon. We have to wrap up soon, but I would like to try to do that one or two more times. If anyone wants to ask their questions directly instead of trying to get me to ask your questions for you, just go.
I don't know if I can get on. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Can you hear me?
I hear you. Yes.
I came in late because I had something else to do. But your story is very interesting because my late sister-in-law, may she rest in peace, lived in Detroit. She adopted 2 children, a boy, blonde, with blue eyes, and a little girl who was black. And her life was miserable, but that was in Detroit. She ended up, when she was 23 years old, she ended up committing suicide. That's how bad it was.
I'm very sorry to hear that.
Yeah. But you got to understand, Detroit is not Montana.
I understand that.
I don't know if you've ever been to Detroit.
I have.
Beg your pardon?
I do know that Detroit is not Montana, and I spent a year in yeshiva in Oak Park, which is right outside of Detroit, so I know that neighborhood.
Well, that's where they lived. They lived in Oak Park. But they had, unfortunately, they had a very anti-Semitic neighbor. And both children it was very difficult, but especially for my niece, because she was black. And as I say, she ended up committing suicide. That's how bad it was.
Well, like I said, I'm sorry to hear that, and I really hope that for future generations, that the world has gotten a little better since then, and that the world will look a little bit more brighter for them. And I believe in my heart of hearts that we're a lot better off now than we were, and we're going to be a lot better because people are coming up.
That's for sure, because I mean, if you go back, if going back myself, if I went back to 45 when I graduated from high school, as a Jew in Toronto, I had trouble getting a job because the Gentile. Now it's different.
No, now in Toronto, if you're not Jewish, you have a hard time getting a job.
No, but in 45, when we graduated, the Gentile girls were sent to Bell Telephone and to the Eaton's Company. And all the Jewish kids, we had to fend for ourselves, and we all had problems getting jobs. It wasn't easy. So
well,
anyway.
Then it's a good sign. Laura, it's a good sign because that means the world is becoming a much better place. So as crazy.
I got news for you. In 1945, my older brother, may he rest in peace, instead of going to medical school, which is another story, ended up going into engineering. And there were 3 Jewish boys went into engineering, and the professor called them out and told them point blank they would never get jobs. And all 3 of them graduated with their engineering degrees and ended up in the States. My older brother always lived in the States. In 1951, he left and never came back.
Wow.
He lived in the United States.
Laura, you got to come to Montana for a Shabbos. We're going to spend the whole Shabbos together sharing experiences. You make a deal with me when COVID's over, you're coming to visit? I didn't hear it.
Can we get another question or two in before we say goodbye? Unmute yourself and start talking like Laura. Hi, Michelle.
Can I ask a question, Rabbi Yuri?
Rabbi Moshe, my older brother.
My question to Rabbi Bruk is, do you feel like you're talking about race relations and things getting better, or are they getting worse, etc. Do you feel like, how much do you feel like, where this goes will directly or indirectly impact your son?
I think that's like asking me if I think COVID's going to affect me. I don't know. We'll wait and see. Either I'll get it or I won't. And if I do, I hope I won't die. And if I do get it and hydroxychloroquine does work or doesn't work, we'll figure it out all along the way. It's called life. You guys are trying to figure out all life issues right here, right now on a call. Guys, come on. Life is the fun of life is figuring out every morning. Okay, it's a new day. What's coming this day? How are we going to deal with it? I don't have answers to all. I'm not a fortune teller, and I wouldn't invest in fortune tellers either. My point is that I don't know. I think everything affects everything. And if we don't recognize that, then A, we're not believing in divine providence, and B, we're not learning from history. Everything's interconnected. The world is interconnected. The world is smaller today than ever. A bat in China is making me decide if I could have services in Montana. Do you understand that there's a bat in China that decided that I can't have services? So you tell me the world is tiny. You have no idea. And here I thought my minion, the problem with the local Jews, turns out it's a bat in China that messed up my whole minion. So we just got to take every day as it is and enjoy life until you get to the trouble. When you get to the trouble, hope and pray that you'll have what it takes and God will give you what you need to get through it. Otherwise, stop losing sleep over things that are out of your control.
I hear you.
Clearly, Rabbi Chaim is entertaining. We're going to get one last question, nothing to do with race relations because he loves talking about it.
Can
Last
that be
question
me?
before we wrap it up.
Can that be me?
Whoever's talking, it's you.
Hi, how are you? My name is Betty. And a
Hi,
question
my name is Chaim. My name is Chaim and I'm an alcoholic. No, I'm just joking. Go ahead.
Okay, you talked about meeting police officers and other public servants in Montana. I kind of have a strange question for you because I come from a police background. My husband, may he rest in peace, he actually died of the virus in April. May his neshama have an aliyah, but that's beside the point. We belong to a police organization. So have you met any Jewish police officers, firefighters, court officers, DAs, ADAs in your travels throughout Montana? We are always looking to reach out to disenfranchised Jews in uniform, National Guardsmen. We always to reach out to join our organization to let them know you are not the only Jew in your area, because there are many disenfranchised Jewish police officers in uniform, firefighters in uniform. We have them all over the country.
I don't know of firefighters or police officers. We do have at least 2 judges in Montana that are Jewish.
Okay.
I don't know about ADAs. I mean, the Attorney General is a sweetheart in Montana. I hang out with him all the time. I do menorah lightings with him every Hanukkah, but he isn't Jewish. But he's a great guy.
Parole officers, anybody in, court officers.
I have to think through the list.
Okay, you know what?
Betty, I'm going to give you Rabbi Chaim's number, and you will you'll work with him.
Cool.
I would love to know if there's a Jewish parole officer, because when they lock me up, I'd love to have him as mine. You got to have your bases covered. That's why it's good to know a judge here, a judge there. You never know where you're going to end up.
I've been.
Aside, we know
Rabbi Chaim, some words of parting, and we will say goodbye. Thank you so much for your time. What's your final argument?
My last will and testament.
Give us your last will before you go. Rest in pieces.
Live happily or drop dead. It's not worth it otherwise. You better enjoy every moment or get the hell out of here. We don't have room and oxygen for people that are not happy. So find a way to be happy, recognize that God loves you, and keep rocking and rolling. And if you can't find it in Toronto, come to Montana and we'll take good care of you. Is that a good last will and testament?
Amazing.
God bless you.
Public decide. Rabbi Chaim, thank you very much for your time. Rabbi Moshe, Rabbi Rafi, Rabbi Sroli, my wife. This has been a pleasure. My parents are here. I think my grandfather's on somewhere.
Zaidi? Zaidi's here?
Zaidi's here. Ima, is Zaidi here?
I've been waiting to meet Zaidi. Now he came to my Zaidi. I could sing something good. The Bubba. I'll talk to you later, guys.
Everybody have a wonderful night. It's been a real pleasure. Good night.